So welcome everybody. Welcome to our webinar today titled The First 100 Days, the 4 Key Elements of Board Induction. My name's Sean McDonald and I shall be your host for the next 40 odd minutes. Firstly, thank you for attending our session today. We really always appreciate the effort you make to be here for our live event. During the session, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or on your toolbar, wherever that is, and we'll try to answer as many of these as we have time for. Finally, if you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, and as is customary for our webinars, we have a very special treat for you. By answering our 1-minute survey at the end of the webinar, you'll go into the draw to win our beautiful gift hamper worth over $400. Last week's winner was Sarah Varkalis of Intist Healthcare. Congratulations again, Sarah. I know you're on the call this morning, or this afternoon as it is. So thanks again for leaving feedback on our survey. Now, for those not too familiar with Board Pro, we are a board software provider that serve just over 30,000 users across the world in about 32 different countries now. And we enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more effectively with less time and deliver a lot more impact and value for the organization. And that's all with our clever software, Board Pro. And as much as we are a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. So for the next 40 odd minutes, 45 minutes to be precise, just relax, listen and add to the discussion by asking as many questions as you would like. A full recording of this webinar along with the slide deck, the white paper that Stephen Bowman has prepared and a board induction checklist will be sent to you at the conclusion of today's webinar. So let me now hand over to our team to introduce themselves, starting with you, Stephen.
Hi everyone and welcome along to this. Steve Bowman from Conscious Governance. I've been involved in boards since I was about 25, I think, and have had the great pleasure of working with some of the best minds from around the world, being on some of the boards that I've either been CEO of or on myself. And part of what we do is share a lot of knowledge with other high-performing boards about what actually really works out there. So look forward to having a discussion with you about induction programs. Georgia?
Hi everyone, my name's Georgia Henry. My organisation is Henry Reid, and my background's slightly different. I've come from a corporate HR background, and probably about 8 years ago really started working with boards extensively in organisation culture and leadership. And so much of the dynamic that we see in the boardroom is reflected through organisations. So I love being able to share knowledge with boards around how to optimise their effectiveness and really look at board dynamics. So I'm looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have today. Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie, strangely enough, as that's what it says underneath my face. And I have a company called The Director's Dilemma. I'm probably known to quite a few of you for my newsletter, The Director's Dilemma, which is the world's most widely read director newsletter, everywhere from Albania to Zimbabwe. And I've been involved with boards and from the late 1980s until now. And like Stephen, I've really focused on what actually works in practice and how you take the regulatory environment and make it work for you.
Thanks, team. So let me now hand back to you, Stephen.
Thanks. So what we're going to cover today are some of the really practical things about board induction programs, and in particular, the things that most boards don't do well, so that if we understand how others don't do it well, we can actually jump the game there and start to do this in a way that actually makes a huge impact. I'm not here to convince you that you should do an induction program, otherwise you wouldn't be here. This is about how to get the most out of your induction programs. So there's 4 key elements in that. The first one is it has to be mandatory. We still come across boards where they say, oh, look, we'll get round to it at some stage. And the director really wasn't really interested. They regarded themselves as a very experienced director and therefore didn't need an induction program. And that's rubbish. because what an induction program is not about basics. It's about how do we learn what works with this organisation that enables me as a new director to add value from day one. So it should be mandatory. The second thing is that it should be formally monitored, and this is not done well at all. Your induction program needs a house to live under. Now, that house is typically the governance committee or the noms and rems committee or whatever it might be, but it has to live somewhere. And wherever it lives, that enterprise, that committee should be the quality control to make sure that A, the induction program is conducted, and B, on a regular basis, that it's actually doing what it needs to do for that particular new director. So it needs to be formally monitored. Mentors assigned. Those boards that do assign mentors have found this incredibly powerful. And in particular, when they swap their mentors around, so that the fourth point there is at least 12 months in duration. An induction program shouldn't just be, here's a wad of papers, good luck, see you at the board meeting. It should be a well thought out, logically structured program over at least a 12-month period that helps a new director get their feet under and really understand the business. The first 6 months, you have a director assigned to them as a mentor, and the second 6 months, a different director, because what you don't know in the second 6 months is very different to what you don't know in the first 6 months. And so changing out those styles of directors who could be mentors is really critical. Julie, thoughts?
Yes, I was a little surprised at the idea of changing mentors after 6 months because I always view mentoring as a long-term relationship. I love the idea of formally monitoring and getting that feedback on how the program has been run. And I'm with you, Stephen, all the way. I absolutely hate it when I join a board or when I hear of people joining boards and being given a stack of documents and told, here's your induction pack. Induction should be a process, not a pack.
Georgia, what have you found?
Oh, absolutely. And it needs to be fit for purpose. It can't just be, here's our standard induction for every director joining our board. There are different levels of experience and expertise, around the boardroom table. And particularly when you start to look at member elected board or not-for-profit boards where you might have a lot of volunteer directors, actually being able to help them get up to speed and get to competency quickly through your induction program is where you're going to add a huge amount of value. So actually being able to customize it to make sure that those directors are getting what they need through induction is essential.
We had a perfect example. Oh, yes, Julie, go.
Add one more thing. If you think about the way in which we keep records of safety inductions, if we started treating board inductions with the same degree of rigor, I think it would be so helpful.
True story. Had an example just yesterday where we've just finished a governance review of a community bank, one of the largest ones in Australia, and the issue there was that the directors on there fell into two camps. One of them from the banking sector and the other camp from community sector, because they're the two sort of skill sets. The induction program for the banking sector person should be about community involvement primarily.
Yep.
The induction for the community person should be about the banking environment primarily. And then if you've got someone who's got both, then you mix them together. So always fit for purpose, and the only reason this doesn't happen is typically there's no committee of the board that's in charge of it, and they haven't really thought about it. It's just been something that it's a tick the box exercise. Okay, let's move on, Sean. So in the white paper that you'll get, there'll be a content and checklist for the sorts of things that you can actually include in your induction list. I'm not going to go through them now. Sean, next slide. That just shows you, don't try and read it. It's got stuff in there that we've found really should be looked at, but then you put it into a 12-month program and you start looking at who the mentor should be in those areas. It gives you a template to start really thinking about your induction program rather than just bundling up the last 3 sets of board minutes. Okay, next one. So one of the things I wanted to do is really say one of the key elements of any induction program should be to help your directors understand the way the board works already. So the first thing is really we should be helping our new directors understand what is our strategic plan, not just giving it to them, but having a conversation around what's gone into that and how we use it, and how we expect you, the new director, to use our strategic plan. So that it's not just about here's the strategic plan, but here's how we want you to use it as a director. So that would include things like ensuring that your conversations and content that you bring to the table are in alignment with the strat plan, or if they're not, explain why they're not. And so you start to use your strategic plan then as a filter. Georgia, what have you seen with people using or not using strategic plans, particularly when they don't really understand the business?
Look, I find that strategic plans are really underutilized. They're done, they're developed, they're put in place. They develop some great KPIs or metrics and focus, and then they put it away. So it's a really underutilized tool. It should be front of mind for every director. And putting a focus on it from an induction perspective, this is the way we work. You set a really clear expectation for the importance and value of the strategic plan in your board thinking and decision making. So including it in induction and actually hoping to uplift everyone else on the board around the use of the strategic plan is essential.
Julie, tips from you?
Yeah, one of the things that I love to do when I join a new board is sit down either with the chair, the CEO, or the CFO and go through where does the money come from, what do we use it for, and where does it go to? And then the other thing I like to go through is, well, what's the strategic plan? How does that show up in the board? What are we monitoring? What are we looking at? Because ideally your strategy should also tell you what do you need to develop your directors in. Because induction really is like the first little bit of director development. And so again, that strategic plan should have elements of, well, this director needs a lot of this, that director needs a little bit. These other directors don't need it at all. And it will vary as you go through the different topic areas in your plan. So, but getting that plan to drive everything you do is the hallmark of a good board.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next one, Sean. Now, the next one is how to read and use your vision statement. I mean, most people don't even know what their vision statement is, or if they do, they don't know how to use it. And one of the key things that can really have a huge impact is to show new directors how we use our vision. Now, that assumes that you do use it. And if you don't, then this might be a good wake-up call anyway. But our vision statement should describe to us, and most of them are pretty good. They're just not used terribly well. Vision statements are about, here's the difference that we want to make. Now, how are we using that? Well, firstly, it should be on your board agenda to remind directors that we're not there to meet. We're there to actually create this vision. So therefore, our conversations, the choices we're making, the decisions that we're making should be directly related back to our purpose, back to our vision. And how we use that, then you could be telling the directors, look, once a year, we take all of our major programs and we run it through our vision statement filter to actually make sure that they're aligned with it. And then that gives us ideas of others. This is how we do it. We'd like you as a new director to, be aware of the vision statement and be mindful of it before you open your mouth, so that you can actually start to use the elements of the vision to help shape the conversations and help shape the questions that you ask that will actually add value to everyone that's there. So, Georgia, thoughts on vision?
Thoughts on vision. Vision really is your long-term aspirational goal, which should align your strategy. So while your operational and your strategic decisions on a short term are aligned to your strategy, anything that's going to have a long-term future impact needs to be absolutely taken towards your vision statement. And Steve, you touched on purpose there. The vision is the long-term what we want to achieve, and the purpose is why. So if things are not aligned to your core beliefs, your purpose, and your vision, why are you doing it? They should drop off. And so your vision really as that long-term guide is essential to keep in mind as to the decisions we're making now. What is the future impact this is going to have for the organisation and those others external that we impact as well?
Yeah. Julie, key insight from you on this?
Yeah, I find a lot of organizations are quite confused when it comes to what's my vision, what's my purpose, what's my mission, what's my goals and objectives and values. So, a really good thing for an induction is to actually sit down and explain to people which is which one guides you most at any given time and why, and how they fit and relate together and support, well, how the strategy supports them, really, rather than them supporting the strategy. But making sure that if you are mission driven, you don't lose sight of your vision and your purpose. If you're purpose driven, don't forget that you still need a vision for some people, and that there is still a mission to deliver, even if it's not the thing that excites you all and gets you going. There's a great question in the chat, Stephen. Any suggestions if you happen to be inducting an almost entirely new board? How do you avoid just sending a pack to them all? Schedule sessions on different topics for them all to attend?
The answer is yes, 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 and yes. I mean, the thing in all of that is that you've got to plan it out. It doesn't just happen. And if you have a 12-month time frame around your induction program, it doesn't have to all happen at the one time. So you can prioritize with each of the directors. There might be some joint activities about the business itself to help them. But then each of the directors will have their own skills, their own experiences, and their lack of skills and their lack of experience. So start to plan that out over that period of time. And it should be a formally monitored and managed process, not just leaving it up to the directors to say, hey, I need to be inducted on X, Y, and Z. They can certainly have an input into it, but it needs to be actually delivered. And if you're lucky enough to have a company secretary, they are the ideal sort of person to actually drive that to make sure that happens.
Mm.
Okay, let's move on.
And a new board is such a great opportunity to get everyone working to the same plan. Yeah, it's much harder developing a new induction process when you've got old directors who are like, well, I never had that. Whereas if everybody's new or almost everybody's new, wow, what an opportunity.
Yeah. So the first one was about using your strategic plan and showing them how to use it. The second one is about vision and showing them how to use it and asking them to actually participate in using the vision. The next one is board policies. Still to this day, many boards don't have a good handle on what their board policies have to be versus what they've actually got. And the key to that is to let the board know this is how we use our board policies. Now, ideally, what you should be saying as part of the induction is all of our major decision or discussion papers will also let you know which are the key board policies that are going to have an effect on this. And here's how we use our board policies. Here are some anecdotes that showed how board policies have actually helped us out in the past. There was one recently where they are collecting anecdotes on how their work health, safety, and bullying and harassment policy have helped them in difficult situations in the past 6 years, to give an idea and a flavour that these policies aren't just bits of paper. They actually help drive behaviour, insight, and provide us guidelines and guide rails. So use them. And that really starts, particularly with new directors that may not have heard that before, gets them to really understand that our board policies are actually a really useful part of what we do, but we've got to be able to use them. Okay, one insight from you, Georgia, in this one.
They're really useful if they're effective. And what I've seen is that there's some board policies and governance frameworks that are not fit for purpose and don't actually enable the board to be able to make the decisions they need to make to run the organisation effectively. So the other thing is get to know the board policies, and also don't be afraid to say, I don't believe this is actually going to work. It's in our best interests, and then start the process for how that changes. So agree. The frameworks are there to make life easier. They give you that guidance and direction only if they're actually effective and fit for purpose.
Julie?
Yeah, never take a policy from somebody else, even if that somebody is your lawyer or your accountant. One size does not fit all. And I find this particularly when there's a regulatory change and a new policy has to be adopted by every single board in the whole country. Lawyers write a standard boilerplate policy and it just doesn't fit anyone. Always grab it and get it in your language for your people. And the other thing I love is at the end of every policy, have a statement that if the application of this policy would generate an unacceptable outcome, the board can waive it. Because you want people to come to you when the policies don't fit and say, hang on, if I apply this policy here, this is likely to happen, and we don't want that, do we? And bring it back to the board, encourage them. That's part of your policy, is getting policies revised and changed.
All of these conversations you have as part of your board induction also starts to put in place the culture of the board as well too. So you're already, without actually calling it, this is cultural training, it's actually starting to help the new board member understand how we're actually working with. Now, someone's asked, can we send us a list of board policies? Board Pro have a webinar just on board policies. So I suggest have a look at that, and it provides you with a list of all the policies that the legislation say you have to have, and those that actually help the board. So have a look at the Board Pro webinar on board policies. Okay, now, one of the most worst areas that we find that directors do is actually understanding how to use the financial reports of the organisation. And as part of the induction, what we really need to do is not just give them a set of financial reports, but show them how we use it strategically to help shape our conversations and to start shaping our questions that we're asking as directors. So profit and loss, for example, one of the things always as part of your induction is to show your new director, look, when you're looking at a profit and loss, look at the variances and ask, what does that tell us? What are the implications behind this? What are the future implications behind this? Why have our assumptions changed? These are the sorts of questions that should be coming from your P&L. So what's not working here? What do we need to do about it? What are the questions that we haven't asked about this? This is all how you can really start to extract insights from your financial reports rather than just saying, yes, I've read the P&L and I've got no questions about it. Okay, now balance sheet.
Can I just mention,
this is going to be a good conversation, this one.
Even if you are not paying your directors, they still need to understand the financial statements. It is not an insult to ask them to learn. In fact, it is a gift that you are giving them by training them and teaching them how to read financial statements.
Yeah, and particularly the questions, when you're reading it, the questions that should be popping into your mind, that if they're not answered in the financial report, you have the obligation to raise them as a director, preferably before the board meeting so they can answer them. Georgia?
And I'd just like to add too, what's sitting behind the profit and loss. Quite often there's complex revenue generation, funding, grants, things like that, that if aren't understood, and the impact that has on the P&L is going to make making the right decisions difficult as well. So don't take the P&L at face value. Ask what's sitting behind it that is going to impact your ability to make the right decisions.
One of the really good examples, and if I just give a shout out to the Australian Indigenous, the Australian Indigenous Allied Health Association. I didn't quite get the name right, but they have a finance committee, and the chair of their finance committee commits to training everyone on that finance committee and the rest of the board on how to read financial statements and to use them appropriately. So as part of their job description, they also have a training and development process as well too, to actually help new directors, so that when those new directors come on, typically they'll go into the finance committee first. They'll be trained up by the chair of the finance committee as part of their job description, and then when they go back onto the board, when they are off that committee, maybe on another one, they have the skill. But also when they go to other boards, they start to. So it's that ripple effect. So a great way of doing that is not just through the induction program, but you can actually get your finance audit risk committee to actually help train up directors in how we do these things rather than just sit at a committee meeting. Okay, next one, Sean. Now, balance sheet, again, your balance sheet really is a statement of relationships. So how do we use our balance sheet? Don't just tell me we've got one. I don't want to rely on the accountants, because the accountants will make sure that it's correct, but I want to know, what are these key ratios? What does liquidity mean? How do we know? What's our range in there? What are the things affecting our liquidity? And what are the other ratios that are actually relevant from that? So how do we use our balance sheet? What do you mean by a lazy balance sheet? What does that mean? Yeah, those sorts of things. So start to really train them up on not just that we've got them, but what they mean and how we use them in our conversations. Next one. Cash flows, really badly done. Often, and I will ask you for your comments on this one, Julie, because I know you got some good ideas here. But most boards don't get a 3-month rolling cash flow. In some cases, it may not be appropriate. In most cases, it should be. A 3-month rolling cash flow is, in the next 3 months, what do you think is going to happen to our cash flow? Because you have some certainty then. You know what contracts are likely to do. You know likely what's going to be coming up. And then you have these, you should have these trigger points that say, if our cash flow is trending down towards these trigger points, we've agreed these are the things we're going to do. So that you start to train up your directors to actually know how to use these reports, not just view them. Julie.
Yeah, I'll take issue with the 3-month rolling basis. I like to see a 15-month bow wave of financial cash flow projection. And yeah, it gets less and less accurate the further into the future you go. Yeah. But you really need to be thinking, in Australia from the 1st of July, where are we going to end up at the end of this financial year? And what are the implications if we're above or below? And what do we need to adjust? And how does that impact our strategy? What are the things that we regretfully said, no, we'll leave for next year, that now we might be able to fund? Or what are the things that we are going to have to regretfully stop funding so that we can continue funding the rest? So really looking at your cash flow and making sure, and it doesn't have to be much beyond a chart. It can be a simple line chart with an axis at 0. I like an axis at 0. And also an axis on what do you think is a comfortable amount to aim to have always in the bank, because invoices never come when you really expect them. They sometimes come early and they sometimes come late after you've spent the cash on other things. So really understand what's driving that, and don't be afraid to look out. Projection.
Don't assume your directors know this. Part of your induction should actually help them. Georgia, any insights on that before we move on?
I just think the cash flows and the projections are essential, particularly when you need to do scenario analysis, looking at what are the things that we're going to commit to and agree. If we don't have that long-term understanding of the impact on our cash and our ability to meet our obligations, we can't make the right decisions. So cash flows are essential.
Cool. Okay, and this is all part of your induction, showing your new directors how we use our cash flows, not just the fact that we've got them. Okay, next one, Sean. Key ratios. I've seen many, many wonderful, very pretty reports that have key ratios on them. And as a director, I look at them and I go, and why are you telling me this stuff? What am I supposed to do with it? So make sure that if you've got key ratios, that you not only have the ratios, but what are the acceptable ranges, where we are, and what are the implications on all of these. We should be training our new directors to really look for what are the strategic implications that these ratios are telling us, and is there any action that we're going to need to consider in advance of needing to do it? Always looking in advance rather than reacting to. Okay, next. Right, now risk management. Oh, do we have a risk management report? Yes, we do. What does it look like? Oh, here's our risk register, 30 pages of it. No, that's not a risk management report. What we need to be training our new directors to look at is to really understand our top 3 or 4 key or critical risks, the big fellas, the ones that are going to have the biggest impact, but also provide us with the greatest strategic advantage if we manage them and leverage them appropriately. So really, as part of your induction program, is showing them the risk management plan, showing them the risk register, saying, oh, we really as a board should be focusing on these key risks and that very important heading that says emerging risks, and really understanding and looking at the opportunities that might arise from really managing these risks well. So taking risk from a compliance issue to the flip side of strategy issue. So again, part of this is people have said, oh, no, look, we're really good at risk management because we ask what are the risks. And then that's the end of the story. Think, hang on a second. How important are they? What are the implications for us? How are we going to leverage them? What are the opportunities? What have we got in? So these are all the conversations that should be had around risk, not just receiving a risk report. Now, very briefly, Julie, key insight from you on risk.
Yeah, and the key insight for me is when you look at a disaster, it's usually this risk then triggered that risk, which triggered another risk, which caused somebody to panic and make that mistake. So don't look at your risks as separate. They're not. They're all interacting and impacting each other. And the best way to understand how that happens is to practice. The best crisis is the one you practice for.
I was mentored by a very, very well-known public company director, and he said, risks, they always come in threeses. Georgia.
I think when you're looking at what information about risk is coming to the board, you need to be looking at what are the strategic risks, what are operational risks, what information you need to know, but also what risks have a basis in legislation and compliance and your duties as a board. And are you getting the right information? Are you actually seeing the information at a board level? Because quite often I see that the information that is filtered up to the board doesn't actually give the board the right information for making the decisions they need to about risk.
Now, don't forget, this is
one more thing. Sorry, I'm thinking very slowly today. Your risk management plan should address the risks that your strategy creates.
Yes.
When you choose your strategy, you choose the risks you think you can handle. And yeah, they are the flip side of your opportunities. But you really don't take a standard set of risks. I see this all the time in prospectuses. Every single company in a certain industry sector has the same top 10 risks. No, they don't. They're different, or they should be. They would be if they weren't just copying someone else's prospectus because they managed to get listed.
So again, the key point in all of this with the induction program is to have these conversations with your new directors, not just to give them material, but to have the conversations and to mentor them and how we go about using these. All right, next, Sean. Now, one of the great gifts of any director is not what they say. The greatest gift of any director are the questions they ask that no one else thought of asking. And so the gift of a director should be their curiosity and the questions that arise from that curiosity. So really what we should be looking at is what are the questions we've got about risks? How does our risk appetite tie in with these things? But that same sort of thinking goes for any part of the organisation. Next one, Sean. Now, Constitution. Oh, don't we love our constitutions? Now, every director should be given a copy of the Constitution, but make life easy for them. Pull out the 3 or 4 or 5 key clauses they must know. And there's actually another Board Pro webinar on how to read and change your Constitution. So have a look at that one as well too. But there are certain things in there that the director should know. And I often find them found in the board charter, for example. So they'll have a section on the Constitution. Here's the Constitution, but here are the 3 or 4 key clauses that you really must know about. So understand it. Know that it's a living, breathing document, but it's also your contractual agreement between you and society. So we really need to understand it. But there's usually about 3 or 4 key things in there. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Reflection on legal responsibilities. Now, again, often we're given a piece of paper that says here are our duties. Really, what we need to do as part of the induction is to actually unpack that, and particularly sharing some stories or vignettes of where we've either come close to where this has been a problem or where we've actually taken this and used it and given very good examples. So duty of care, to act as an ordinary prudent person would, there's a whole lot written on that. Duty of loyalty, if you've got to act in the best interest of, you can't use information to the detriment of. So you just talk about some of these things. Duty of obedience, and I'll throw to Julie on this one as too. But the duty of obedience says, really, if you've got rules, you've got to follow them. And rules are things like constitution, policies, legislation, all those sorts of things that you've got to have in place. Now, what have we got in place to show that we do that? Any thoughts on the reflection on legal responsibilities? Julie, you first.
Yeah, I always emphasize the duty of obedience is to proper process. It is not obedience to the chair. I mean, proper process is that you respect your chair, but if your chair is asking you to do the wrong thing, then you respectfully disagree. It is not all about cozy groupthink. It is actually about saying, if I make these decisions, I am willing to be bound by them. I will support them. If I've accepted these policies, then I will act in accordance with them. Would have saved a certain Mr. Brereton a lot of hassle in the papers today. But a duty of obedience, so many boards get that confused with groupthink, keeping your head down, not rocking the boat. That's not what it is. It's about doing the right thing.
The other big part in there, I'll come to you in a sec, Georgia. One of the other big parts in there is conflict of interest. And what I found, what one board has done, which I thought was a really great idea, is they've actually collected examples from the last 5 years of conflicts of interest and how they dealt with them. And it's a little paper they developed which says, and this is why we dealt with them that way. And so it starts to give you a flavour of the business, and we encourage interests. But this is how we manage conflicts. And here's an example of how we did that, or maybe sometimes an example of how we didn't do it so well. Really good for federated organisations, by the way, because often they are full of conflicts of interest. And if they're well managed, it's fantastic. And if they're not, it's a dog's breakfast. Georgia.
Look, these duties really, for me, set the foundation of everything. They should be reflected in your constitution, in your codes of conduct, in your values and core beliefs, in your, like, these things really should be the foundation for how we behave, what we accept, what we believe in, and be reflected through everything, through your risk appetite statements, as they apply legally, but also for your organisation, because these are things that you cannot work around. They exist, but the way that you uphold those and reflect them should be bound by your policies, your governance frameworks, your risk appetite, to give you the guidance for how you uphold these duties within this organisation, how you address these issues within your organisation. So these are foundational and should be reflected through everything.
And as part of the induction, if the mentor then can pepper that with stories, anecdotes, evidences of, examples of, whatever it might be, this stuff comes to life. And actually, a good induction program is where people have said, it was awesome. It really gave me insights. Even though I'm an experienced director, gave me insights that there's nowhere else I could have got it from. Okay, next one, Sean. Okay, so mentoring. In the white paper, we've provided you with some guidelines for both mentors and the person being mentored, often called a mentee for some reason. But there's some stuff in there. I don't want to go into that in detail now, but just it needs to be a managed process, and it needs to be something that is mandatory, not just if we get round to it. Okay, next one, Sean. So 3 key areas in the first 100 days on a board. make the most use of the induction program. Really, really power through the induction program. Now, you as the recipient of the induction program should also have the right to say, I'd like a little bit more in this area, or I'd like to understand this a little bit more. So it becomes an iterative process, not just here is the induction program. Understand how the board uses various resources. Understand how we work with these as a board. Because a lot of directors, they've been on many boards, doesn't mean they're a good director. It means they've been on many boards. That's all it does. And so, therefore, there may be a whole lot of bad habits that we may need to help reshape. And then, as a director, be willing to contribute questions and discussion, but have that through the filter of the vision, through the filter of the risk management, through the filter of the strategy. So they're informed rather than just seeking information. So, last slide. There's something on there. If those that are interested, have a look at that. But there's a program that we put together, which is an online program that actually helps directors who are going through an induction program look at their material in a way similar to what we've talked about there. So we've just put that up there if you're interested in it. Now, Julie, top 2 tips from you on induction programs.
Actually, before we do tips, Julie,
Two questions.
Yeah, 2 great questions that have come in.
2 great questions, Julie.
So Hammer is asking, what is a typical expectation or duration for a director to be fully contributing to the organisation? And in answering this question, please consider both new and experienced directors.
Yeah, my view is day one, because they should be looking at the sorts of questions. They're on the table because they're sitting around the board, hopefully because they're different.
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking differently. They're looking at things differently. Now, different and ignorant are quite different. So I would want, before the first board meeting, I'd be wanting to have some of those conversations. If I was going to choose before the first board meeting what I would want my new director to really understand, I'd probably be looking at risk management, finances, and strategic plan. Those key things, so that they can actually ask questions that are related to that. But I wouldn't be waiting. The idea of, they should be 6 months before they say anything, rubbish. But they've got to be helped, mentored, and assisted. Thoughts? Anyone else?
I work on the theory they can go to jail just the same as everyone else, so they better be understanding or asking questions so they understand. Georgia?
Definitely contributing from day one. They are there for a reason. They may not be fully contributing with full understanding, but they need to be asking the questions and contributing from day one.
And even if those questions are asked prior to the board meeting, so they don't ask questions they don't need to ask at the board meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
What are the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, or where are the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience given force in a New Zealand context? And do they relate to the 7 duties in the Companies Act directly or indirectly?
Directly, and they do apply because they're not, you won't find them under legislation, but they're the headings that most talk about. So that's a much longer conversation, but you'll find a whole lot of material written. If you want it just for your country, it'll be very similar to other countries, but with maybe some different language in it. Okay, Sean.
Hi, Sean. Poor Sean. He's busy typing answers to questions. And
all right, Julie, one top tip as we leave.
I'm here.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, everybody. So we're coming to the end of the webinar. We have some great topics between now and December 19th for you on the cards. So just stop by our website and our webinars page and just have a look at those. So you'll receive an email from us. It'll be later this afternoon now, which will include a video of the webinar today and also the presentation slides and the white paper from Stephen. As I mentioned before, just as you're leaving the webinar, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey. Go into the draw. We'll announce the winner this afternoon. Actually, it'll be tomorrow now. So thank you, everyone, for your attendance. I hope you enjoyed the session today. Thanks again, Stephen, Julie, and Georgia. Look forward to seeing you all again, everybody. Thanks, and have a great day.